comparable county to ours. Have you had any opportunity to present that to the stakeholders here, people that have had comments that you presented to us? Have they had that opportunity to look at that and see if that's a workable type of a document?
They have not. That's why I based the draft that we brought forward here today on that ordinance. And there's a number of wordings that are directly out of the Tuolumne ordinance that are in this draft ordinance. My hope is that, as happened in Tuolumne County, once builders decided to actually look at something and focus down on what they might accept, that maybe we can get some new input from them and new input from the Housing Task Force folks, and we can have more of a back and forth on the draft. And, for you to actually indicate some wording that you're interested in seeing in here, and that was kind of our idea too. This is just purely draft. It's way out there in terms of, a final ordinance. This is just talking points that we've tried to put forward so that people can come up and say, well, as the affordable housing advocate said, well, we don't like the formula. The formula is important to be a particular way because it won't cover the gap. We'd also like to hear from other people saying similar kinds of things on the wordings, and that was our idea of bringing it forward.
Thank you, Ms. Hershey. Other comments from Supervisor Smith?
Thank you. To staff, I'm looking at your notes from the beginning when you talk about voluntary programs have not been effective in meeting affordable housing needs. And I'm looking back to our discussion materials from, I believe it was January of '07. We had a lengthy discussion, and we received numerous materials on that date. And there's a section here that says, can a voluntary program be as effective as a mandatory program? And it seems that they're coming up with basically what you have found to date. It talks about various jurisdictions, that only 6 jurisdictions responding to the survey identified their policy as voluntary. None of these jurisdictions was among the most productive, and 3 reported no production of inclusionary units at all. Programs classified as mandatory with exceptions, which is maybe something we ought to look at, because they allow developers to avoid inclusionary requirements under certain conditions, such as a small project size or lack of funding, appeared in both groups. Although truly voluntary programs are generally unsuccessful in producing affordable units, mandatory programs with exceptions are not necessarily less effective simply because they permit exceptions. So I think if we're really trying to talk about crafting something that's going to work, instead of just crafting something that we just have on record, we really need to look at the substantive components of this. And I think, this comment interfaces with your findings to date. So I think we need to take that into consideration. I think we need to do a much better job of working with the cities, and I think we're starting to do that. I think there's a lot of potential working with the city of Fort Bragg on these issues, and I've seen that come forward of late, and I think that we have a city council that's very eager to do that, and I think that we do have some partnering options, and we need to get to work on what those are to see if we can meet some of our housing needs within their parameters and how we go about getting it to qualify under a document like this. But still back to this thing of the 1,000 square feet. I really think we need to have this whole issue really fully vetted. I'd like to know if our legal folks have anything to say about this, because we did talk about it at this almost 18 months ago, as to the effectiveness, because I still don't see that we've got that nexus, and if it's something that the board majority really wants to see, we're going to have a connection to show the affordability. If you create your 1,000 or your 985 square foot unit, and then you rent it for $1,200 because you're told that that's what it can bring, you haven't created affordability. However, if you're doing what Supervisor Pinches says has been done in his family, which I think is true, I know of a number of them on the coast where they do work in this way, where you're renting it to either a family member or a senior or someone on a fixed income, you could maybe say that nexus is occurring, but we're going to have to be able to document that. And I just haven't seen, without any other strings attached to this, I don't think that's getting us there. So I would like to make sure that our legal staff, since this is part of our housing element with the state, takes a serious look at that. And then this whole question of waiving the fees. You know, if we don't have the connection to affordability, on what grounds can we waive fees? Somebody's paying for that. And I think that that really needs to be addressed, because it means our staff it's basically being subsidized out of the general fund. And so we need to acknowledge that. And if we're not creating the affordability, on what basis are we deciding we're gonna waive fees for folks that have the ability to put a second structure on their property that meets the less than 1,000 square foot criteria? So I think these are all really serious and compelling things that need to be fully explored before we go forward. But with this mandatory versus voluntary, they're talking here in this document that was brought to us before that you can do these mandatory with exceptions provisions, and that we ought to fully explore what that looks like in terms of trying to incentivize it. Thank you.
Supervisor Pinchas.
Just a quick comment, Supervisor Smith, on waiving the fees. If, let's say we were lucky enough to build 50 landowners took advantage of this and went in and applied for a fee waiver and built 50 different units. The assessed evaluation that was increased would more than offset the money that's lost to the general fund by waiving the fee. So it would actually be a revenue source and not a revenue cost to the county.
Okay. Any additional comments from the board? To the staff, been a lot of things bannered around. Have you gotten direction on moving to the next step? Or
Is this where you say the meeting will continue until we're finished? We have received direction, and we can certainly work with what we've received. I think that the next steps here would be, as Diana said, to look at the Tuolumne County model as a similar county. Doesn't mean we have to slavishly follow it, but it gives us a place to start, and have those discussions with the developers group, with the housing task force, et cetera, and see if and where we can come to some agreements, and where maybe there's agree to disagree, and bring something back before you. Our goal, and it's not just to have something, it is because it is felt that an inclusionary housing ordinance is, whatever it ends up looking like, is a means of dealing with the issues of affordable housing, and it happens to be a required element of the housing element. We do intend to bring before you in the near future an inclusionary housing ordinance that you can take action on, and that is our goal. Our goal is also to be able to make it as incentive-based as possible, and to have as many either voluntary or allow exception, et cetera, all of those parts of it, and we'll see what that ends up looking like. I do want to say in general that the production of affordable housing is part of a much larger kind of universe of discussion here in this county. It involves issues around economic development. It involves issues of people in migration to the county and out migration to the county. It has to do with your mix of age groups and who's settling in this county and who's staying. And housing doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I think that just kind of, I don't know what the term would be, but just the movement in those areas, whether it's economic development or housing, is relatively slow in this county. And so trying to address some of these issues is a relatively slow proposition. And it's going to take a lot of different pieces. And truly, I believe it is going to take some public-private partnerships to really move some of this forward. So what you want your inclusionary housing ordinance to be is a tool that